Good morning. It's good to see each and every one of you that chose to be with us this morning. Several of you are visiting. Indeed, some of you are visiting for the first time. Let me greet you and say thank you and let you know that we love and appreciate our visitors. We will ask a favor of you. No, you don't have to stand up. But if you'd take just a moment to locate one of the yellow visitor cards, there should be one on the pew rack in front of you. And if you haven't filled that out in the past, could you take just a moment and fill that out? Not only so we could have a record of your attendance, but also so that we can know we gave you an opportunity to make any request you might have known, or maybe you had a need, or maybe be interested in a visit from myself or the elders, or you had a nagging Bible question, or you'd be interested in a Bible study or a Bible correspondence course being sent to you. Whatever that might be, you can indicate that there. Also, I'm being reminded, ever so dramatically, that we do have our children's Bible hour, and if you have children between the ages of 2 and 5, they can be dismissed at this time, and they'll have a teacher to lead them in a lesson that's for their age group. So we encourage you to take advantage of that if you'd like. Ages 2 to 5, they'll be directed to the classroom just back to the left as you exit. I'm excited about the lesson this morning. I feel compelled, as I did last week, to offer a disclaimer. That disclaimer is, although it might be a surprise to some of you, I'm no astrophysicist. Wow, thank you. I didn't get as big a laugh as I was concerned about. No, I'm not an expert on any of these disciplines, and so my efforts may fall a bit short, but I think that it'll be fruitful for us to look into this subject. And you know, I've been criticized in the past for doing sermons like this. However, I think they are vital to the culture we live in, especially for our young people who, unlike a generation before, are bombarded with theories that have become postulated as superior to the notion of intelligent design. And so as we started last week, we looked at the notion of a cause and effect argument for the existence of God, or for the existence of the universe, rather, I should say. We have the universe. It is the effect. It's undeniable. So what caused it? It didn't cause itself. That's irrational. I think there's evidence to suggest it's not eternal, and so it had to have a beginning. And so what caused that? So we looked at that as an argument for the existence, or necessity, we might say, of a divine creator, of something that is timeless, spaceless, and immaterial, and independent of the creation. Well, to put it in simple terms, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So that's what we looked at last week. We continue this discussion this week and next, looking at, well, some evidence or arguments or proof for a divine creator. And so we look specifically this morning at design. It's my favorite, argument or line of reasoning or proof to advocate for a creator. In Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 4, it was our reading, and I'll give you kind of a little bit of a paraphrase. Every house that's built is built by a man, but all things are built by God. We would never look at something like a house and say it spontaneously arrived in all the necessary parts to compose a roof and a door and a window and all the appropriate nails and fittings and brackets and wood and sheetrock and the like. We would never suggest all of those parts, given enough time, would come together and create a house. We would always say, somebody built that house. And so as we look at this basic argument, the argument from design to argue that there is a divine, intelligent designer, well, all we're saying is as you observe, the world, that you see design and order. And therefore, what produced it? Now, what's interesting about this, and I hope I'll make this point, it is a concession on the part of academia that there is indeed what they'll call the appearance of design, the appearance of intelligence. The only explanation they offer is chance. Do you know another word for chance? Luck. So just given enough time that chance will allow, with enough regression back in the infinite past, that all of the parts and components for a house could come together and then be a house. You know, there's the old argument that is just transcribed by simply saying a watch must have had a watchmaker. When I was a kid, we had VCRs. You can Google it, young people. I remember we had a VCR that didn't work no more. So I got to unscrew it, take the lid off, and look at the guts inside of it. That was neat. It's got a bunch of little moving parts and gears and working things and this doohickey and that thingamajig, you know, and this little thing. And so it worked, all of these little parts. Same thing with a watch. If you open up the back of it, it's got gears and various components. And they didn't just come together, but they were designed. Kind of like a painting necessitates, requires an artist or someone who painted it. I want you to imagine this, if you will. You find this beautiful scene. Maybe it's in the mountains, maybe it's the beach, whichever one you like. And it's just a beautiful scene, and you come upon it, and you're out in nature, and you're like, wow. Then all of a sudden, you see an easel, and on it is a painting on canvas. And you recognize it. You say, I watched that episode of Bob Ross. That's a Bob Ross. And you look at the painting, and you say, well, yeah, Bob Ross painted that. There's a happy little tree here and a happy little tree there. Yeah. And then you look at the actual existence of nature and say, chance. The scene itself, chance. The painting of the scene, it had a designer. There's an absurdity in that. Here's one of my biggest arguments in all of this lesson this morning. If things are composed, there was a composer. I'm not talking about music composer. Think Legos. Legos are pretty elaborate, and you can actually get a Lego set and build, you know, a skyscraper, or, you know, you can build the Eiffel Tower, or a car, or a person, or, you know, you can build it. It's made up of little bitty parts. Each of those parts create a bigger overall structure or thing. If it was composed of all those little Lego pieces, what do we extrapolate? Well, somebody put all them little Lego pieces together, right? If it's a puzzle, and the puzzle presents a beautiful picture or scene or flowers. I remember one time, my mother likes working puzzles, and so to keep from having to have a whole lot of conversation, we got a puzzle. And so we put the puzzle together, and there's all these little flowers that look the same. At the end, it made this big picture. But it was composed. Well, when somebody came by and saw that the puzzle was done, what would they extrapolate? Well, somebody put all them little pieces together and composed it. That's one of my greatest arguments this morning. We're talking about the basic argument that there was a designer to all the material world. It's often referred to as fine-tuning or precision. Now, let me caution you. I run the risk of losing the audience here, so please bear with me. But I'm not going to spend a great deal of time or harp on this particular aspect because I'm no expert in it. Let me offer you this if you're interested in this notion of a fine-tuning or the precision of the universe. Investigate the works of a fellow named William Lane Craig. William Lane Craig and his arguments for fine-tuning or precision of the universe. He is an apologist, and he is, well, he's got more degrees than a thermometer, so he can better suit these discussions, but I'm no ignoramus, and I got the gist of it. If we look at our universe, there are certain things that are considered constants. For example, the mass of a proton or an electron, or gravity itself, or the electromagnetic force, or the cosmological constant. Do you remember we talked about Albert Einstein last week? You've probably heard of that fellow, right? Well, he was the one that extrapolated mathematically, with the discipline of mathematics, well, that the universe is expanding. The only way he was able to figure that out was he determined that there was an unchanged constant in the equation. That's the same thing for any number of things. You've heard of E equals mc squared, right? I don't know what in the world it means, but I've heard of it, right? No, I'm kidding. E, energy, equals mass, and then something, what's the C stand for? Speed of light. Well, why is it not S? E equals ms squared. Because he determined that the speed of light was a constant that you could actually measure mathematically, and it'd be the same every time. And so there are some constants or some fine-tuned particulars Do you ever wonder why disciplines like calculus or physics or advanced mathematics actually work out? Well, it wouldn't work out if there wasn't precision. Let me give you one example. And this is the example of gravity. You know how you determine gravity? Well, there's a formula. And as you might imagine, that formula has an interesting component to it. Now, this was discovered before the apple fell and hit Isaac Newton on the head, if there ever really was an apple that fell and hit him on the head. But nonetheless, there's this mathematic formula that is precise, repeatable, and it requires this constant. And so if we want to know, well, the force of gravity on any two objects, which incidentally, how do you think with precision they're able to land some type of instrument or rocket on the moon or on a foreign planet or rotate and orbit the Earth or the moon or what have you with any type of precision? Well, there's mathematical equations, including the force of gravity. But it requires this constant, this gravitational constant. And without that fine-tuned precision, we wouldn't be able to extrapolate the things that we do. Now, it's been suggested by mathematicians and astrophysicists, not preachers. It has been extrapolated that if we were to change one part in 10 to the 60th power of gravity, that life wouldn't exist. You say, Brother Joe, help me out. You lost me. You had me and you lost me. What in the world does that mean? When I was a kid, we had dials for the radio. Some of y'all remember. Dial for the volume typically went up to 10. 1, 2, 3, you get it. And then your mom would say, turn that down. And you'd go from 10 to 9. I turned it down. And it was a dial, right? It just went in little increments, 1 to 10. So if you take this number, it's been proposed that if we took that dial, so to speak, and here's what the number would look like. Wouldn't you like to see that in a check? But here's what the number is represented. It's 1 in 10 to the, 60th power. So here's the number. If you just move the dial one part, one tick, and it had this many ticks on it, this number represented here, that life on earth wouldn't exist. It's that fine-tuned. You couldn't do it any other way and life function and work that way. And guys, I don't know how to impress this upon you enough. These are not theologians or scholars of the Bible or preachers who are coming up with this reality of the fine-tuning and the precision that allows disciplines like calculus or advanced physics or even theoretical physics or astrophysics or cosmology to actually work. You know, odds of winning the lottery are 1 in 10 to the 9th power, or roughly 1 in 100 million. Now, if it's the Powerball, I looked it up, it's more like 375 million, give or take. So the odds of winning the lottery are 1 in 10 to the 9th power. It has been suggested by advanced mathematicians that the odds of the universal constants actually happening is about 1 in 10 to the 120th power. I'll give you an assignment. Go write all them zeros today. And that's the theoretical odds of these constants. You know, the constant, for example, of the mass of a proton or gravity or electromagnetic forces or the speed of light, etc. All right, here's a handsome fella here. This is Roger Penrose. Roger Penrose is one of the most decorated mathematicians of our time. He is not a believer. He's not a preacher. He's not an advocate of any religious discipline. But he's a mathematician. And what he discovered was, in order for life to begin in the fashion that it did, or for the universe to exist, the chance, there's our word, the probability, the likelihood, he advocated the probability was 1 in 10, that's a billion, not to the 123rd power, times the 123rd power. And this was actually published in peer-reviewed journals, and this is an accepted fact among, accomplished mathematicians. What are the odds? What's the likelihood? Another interesting individual is Fred Hoyle, Sir Fred Hoyle. He is a British astrophysicist and cosmologist. Now, what he said in terms of this theory that we have derived from the process of infinite regression and all of just happenstance and chance, he said, we must now admit to ourselves that the probability of life arising by chance, by evolution, is the same probability of throwing 6 in dice 5 million consecutive times. What's the odds that this just happened by chance? Now, speaking of the fine-tuned issue specifically, Fred Hoyle, this highly decorated astrophysicist who is respected in all of these disciplines as one of the foremost scholars. Listen to me. He is the furthest thing, well, I don't know if that's accurate. Here's how I want to say it. He's the furthest thing you could be from a Christian. In fact, some of his theories about how we derived at life, they wouldn't match the Bible. You can go read them. He is no theologian. He is not arguing. He's not like, well, I'm an apologist, and so I'm... No. He is a scientist. And he said, do you realize that his main discipline, his doctorate, is in astrophysics, which requires a great degree of mathematical, compilation, which requires all these constants that are part of the universe. All right, here's what he said, and I quote, "A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that superintelligence has monkeyed with the physics as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seems to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question." In other words, somebody created these laws of nature that have rhyme or reason or fine-tuning independent of any other explanation, to suggest that they're random, or to suggest that the fine-tuning of the universe is happenstance, chance, or luck, is not a reasonable conclusion. And that's what the foremost experts of science are saying. Now, let's get a little more practical, because I know I run the risk of losing the audience, and bear with me, and hey, look, don't try and write all this stuff down. If you want my slides, you can have them, and these are things you can extrapolate independently. But let's talk about some things that are super practical. What about the precision within our solar system and our planet? What about our distance from the sun? The precise location of our distance from the sun is necessary for life to exist at all. If we were a little closer, we'd be like other planets in our solar system that were too hot to sustain life, and the contrary, if we were too far, we'd be too cold to sustain life. Or we might think about things like our distance from the moon, which may seem immaterial, but it's vital. Our moon, among other things, is necessary for tides. You say, well, why do I care about the tides? Well, without the tides and the influence the moon has over the oceans, then oceanic life as we know it will be off balance, and maybe so catastrophically as to not allow for life at all. What about our rotation of the earth and the tilt of our axis? Are those incidental or accidental? No, cosmologists and the astrophysicists who do the extrapolating will tell us that the rotation, the speed at which our earth rotates, and the axis degree are not only precise and constant, but they are required to sustain life. If it was tilted any different, or it sped up or slowed down, it would dramatically affect the potential for life. It's precise, not incidental, not accidental, but it's precise. Our atmosphere. You know what's interesting about our atmosphere is it's composed of a number of elements, a precise number of elements that create, I guess, kind of like a blanket around our planet. Something that is not present in other planets. If we look at other planets around us that we can observe, they don't have the atmosphere we do. They don't have the same components that make up the atmosphere that protect us, and in large part from the UV rays that come off of the sun. We need the sun for energy and light and photosynthesis. But it also has harmful components that our ozone layer or our atmosphere keep from penetrating and killing us. Well, that's not the case on other planets. On other planets, the atmosphere is too thin, too thick, not composed of the right elements. And so guess what doesn't happen on those planets? Life. the oceans and the water cycle. What's interesting is the Bible mentions the water cycle specifically. But what's interesting about that is we have housed within our planet and encompassed in our atmosphere this cycle in which water is evaporated, goes up into the clouds, and then waters other components of the earth and keeps this cyclically to create and sustain life. Why is it that when NASA will go and say, we think we found water on another planet? Why is that so noteworthy? Because of its necessity, not only to have it, but for it to be able to be, facilitated throughout the whole planet. What about the symbiotic relationship of the animal kingdom? Brother Joe, what in the world are you talking about? Okay, well, I'll tell you. You breathe in oxygen, and you exhale, or you emit, or you produce carbon dioxide. Okay, great. Thanks for the science lesson. Well, no, but what's important is that the plant life, predominantly trees, they do the opposite. They breathe in our byproduct, carbon dioxide, and then they produce, or exhale, if you will, oxygen. See this necessitary means by which it was produced? You know, the animal kingdom is interesting. We could probably mention, I don't know, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of facts about the animal kingdom. But I'm going to leave you with one. You see this cute little creature? That is a plant-hopping insect. If you want its Latin name, it's right there. I'll spare you me trying to pronounce Latin. Now, what's interesting about this is as we advanced as a culture and as a science, we were able to do things like take an electron microscope and then zoom in. That's a portion of its hind leg. What does that look like to you? Looks like gears. Interestingly enough, as you watch it in motion, it works just like a gear. And this is just one among countless evidences for the design. When I was a boy, I remember shooting a bird. I shot a bird, and I won't tell you which kind because I don't know that it's legal to shoot that actual bird. So I shot it, and it died, and I looked at it, and I can remember, from this day, I can still remember, I was a young boy. I don't remember, might have been 12. And I took its wing, and I spread it out. And then I let it go back, and then I spread it out. It's fascinating to look at the intricate design and functionality of the variety of the animal kingdom. And as you study about the necessity of the animals, whether we're talking about the balance of those that exhale oxygen or those that inhale, or we talk about the animal hierarchy or web or circle of life. You know, the cow is interesting. You ever, I imagine most of you know, it has a plurality of stomachs and is able to ingest and digest grass, but you have to have a symbiotic relationship of this planet. Let's talk about the human body ever so quickly. The skeletal system. You have a great number of bones in your body. Do you know where you have the most bones, interestingly enough? Your feet. 26. That's a pretty big percentage of the roughly 200 bones that you have. And so here's this structure. Remember how I said a long time ago, or earlier in the lesson, I guess I should say, that if you saw a Lego set, you would extrapolate that, well, somebody put that Lego set together. Well, this structure serves as kind of like the framework of a house, which is your skeletal structure. Also, it's designed to have various things within it that are necessary to, well, life. We can think about the skin. The skin is very interesting. Skin has multiple layers, it has sweat glands, and it has secretions of oil, all of which that keep it functional and alive. It's interesting to look at under a high-powered microscope. They're actually little overlapping layers. It serves not only to protect us from those UV rays that I mentioned, but it actually takes those UV rays and then turns it into vitamin D. Also, we see that it's waterproof and it keeps, bacteria and other various things from the environment from getting into our bloodstream. Highly complex, designed. Oh yeah, by the way, and if you cut it, you've all done this. What you have to do is you have to voluntarily tell all your cells to go to that place and heal that. No, it does that involuntarily. It's just been made that way. Then there's the circulatory system, that it's comprised and it's governed by a pump. Actually, your heart is two muscles, really, that work together, and it, serves as a pump to pump blood necessary throughout the vital, parts of your body. Do you know when you eat, blood rushes to your stomach to aid in the process of digestion? When you read, it rushes to your head. When you play video games, it doesn't do anything. That was for my son. All right. But the advanced nature of the circulatory system, and by the way, your blood vessels are housed appropriately within the skin. Your digestive system is a very complex and precise chemistry set of sorts in the process of digestion. And one of the things that I wanted to mention here as we mentioned the brain is really just this. How much of these actions are involuntary? You can't make your food digest or your heartbeat. All of these are part of the complexity and functionality of a machine of sorts. God said in Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 12, the hearing ear, and the seeing eye, the Lord has made them both. I want you to jot all this down. It'll be on the test for next week. I only want to make one point. The functionality demands design. But is this made of parts? I think one of the greatest arguments is if we find something that's made of a bunch of different necessary parts to make it work, that somebody had to put them parts together. And we appreciate that in every discipline of life. You would never come upon a car and say, well, there must have been a tornado in the junkyard and it put all these parts together and now the car works. Nobody'd ever extrapolate like that. We can actually trace this all the way to the cellular level. Cellular biology is absolutely fascinating. As we think about the nature of things being made and composed of other little parts, we can think about elements. For instance, something as simple as water is a composite of parts, H and 2O. Put together, that becomes a molecule. An atom is the element that arguably is the simplest element. However, it's comprised of parts too. It has a nucleus and it's surrounded by a series of electrons made of parts. Cells are the simplest form of a living organism. Have you ever heard this term, a single-celled organism? Well, a single cell is very complex. What's interesting is there are produced and generated by computers these demonstrations of what occurs in a single cell. Harvard, for instance, put out a video that you can watch on YouTube that shows this dramatization of what goes on. There's also observation in microscopes that will show you the inner workings of cells. It's like a little factory. It has these little workers that have these little appearances of design to their efforts to do certain activities in the cell. Again, independent of your will. All these cells that are doing various activities, all of these cells have in them DNA. Now, I know you've heard of DNA. Let me just encourage you. Go study DNA on your own. I'm no expert in it. But what I understand is there is a coding or a language that's present in each cell. It actually helps to construct the cell. If we're going to be technical, it constructs the protein that forms the cell. Made of parts. A puzzle. I've never seen a 30 trillion piece puzzle. I don't like anything over 500 myself. There's roughly 30 trillion, some will say 10 trillion. I don't know that we know for certain, but that's how many individual cells, each of which is comprised of a coding language. And it's been argued that if we were to take that coding language and then put it in something that we could extrapolate, it would be akin to the 30-volume Britannica Encyclopedia set. That's how much information is in each cell. Would you ever get the Britannica 30-volume set of the encyclopedia and go, well, all them letters just kind of flew together on a page and it just... No, somebody actually had to go and write those individual things, orchestrate those letters in certain fashions to make words and sentences to have the 30 volumes. That's roughly how much information is in each cell, and you have 30 trillion of them. You made a 30 trillion little cells, each of which has a code or a writing or a language. I know you've heard of Bill Gates. He knows a little something about computers and software, you reckon? He said this: DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. Now, I don't know Bill Gates' religious affiliation, but he's no apologist or Bible scholar, and he's certainly not a theologian or advocating for the origin of that DNA. But he does say that it's a complex language. Ever known a complex language to come from anywhere other than a mind and an intelligence? All I'm offering you is some evidence. Don't ever let anybody convince you that there's not evidence on your side for believing in a divine creator of a universe that has undeniable order, design, and intelligence. The overall point of this, I guess, is we ought to be in awe of this. You know, man has a tendency to rationalize, excuse, ignore, or deny these truths. In Romans chapter 1, and we alluded to it last week in verse 20, it reminds us that, well, man is without excuse by the observable nature. The things that are invisible created all the things that are visible, and even the things that are subatomic, that aren't visible to the naked eye anyway. They were all created by God on the cellular level and beyond. Remember? Man builds a house, but God is the builder of all things, including the single living cells, the trillions of them that, well, incorporate you and your body. But we have a tendency to rationalize and excuse and ignore. There was a poet who once said, if the stars only appeared once in 1,000 years, the creation would stop and gaze at them in amazement. He went on to suggest because they're there every night, we pay no attention to them. We ought to be in awe. We're told that those who are enamored, fascinated, intrigued by the works of God will study them. That's a very loose paraphrase of the 111th Psalm in the second verse. The evident works of God and all of the material universe, including us, are things that we ought to be in awe of. I don't say this because I suppose it. I say it because, well, that's what the Bible says. Again, a loose paraphrase of Psalm 19 will remind us that the heavens declare the glory of God. And if we look up at the sky or the firmament, it's the handiwork of God, the fingerprint of God, if you will. Who wrote that code of DNA? Is there undeniable evidence in your very existence or the material universe that you observe that it was created and that we ought to pause to appreciate that? Absolutely. In Isaiah chapter 6 and verse 3, there's this reminder in the year that King Uzziah died that Isaiah had a vision. And his vision was a theophany, an appearance or manifestation of the glory of God. And he recorded that the angels said, "Holy, holy, holy." That's not all they said. The next thing they said is, "The earth is full of his glory." Interestingly enough, Kenny led us in these songs about glory. Here's the glory of God evident in the material universe and the particulars that we've mentioned this morning. But you know, our awe is not in the creation itself, but the one who created it. Every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. Now, the verse just prior to that says that the one who built the house is worthy of much more honor than the house. The one who built the cellular level of all the material universe is the lover of your soul. He created you in your mother's womb. He formed and fashioned you. You were fearfully made in the wonder of his creation. And he's got a bottle for every tear you cried. And he's written your name on his hand. He's crazy about you. The one who did all this. You think them fellows are smart, them astrophysicists? All they're doing is discovering the one who created it all. And he loves you. He loves you so much that he was willing to send his son to die in your place, to give a means by which you might be received by this God, the creator of the material universe, received in holiness, to enjoy communion and fellowship, but it requires the blood sacrifice of his son to cover you. You can confess Jesus this very morning and be immersed in water for the forgiveness of your sins. Maybe you're subject to that invitation this morning. Maybe you're subject to the invitation for some other sort of spiritual need that we can assist you with. If you're subject, we want to encourage you to come while we stand together and sing.